As you may have heard before, there are common prefixes that we can use to words that kind of have meaning as far as numbers are concerned. So here's some common ones that you should know. Kilo means 10 to the third, or 1,000. That means that 1 kilometer is 10 to the third meters. That's what that K in front means. And that means it's the same thing as 1,000 meters. So those are things that are equal. They're exactly equal, and that's something we're going to use as we move forward. Okay, so that's the one that's big. The other ones are pretty small because we deal with small things in the body. Next we have deci. That is 10 to the negative 1. Think of this as like a dime. So a decigram is 10 to the minus 1, or 0.1, the same way a dime is 0.1 of a dollar. Centi, same thing here. That is 10 to the negative 2. So 1 centimeter is 0.01 meter, or 10 to the minus 2 meters. Milli is 10 to the minus 3. So 1 milliliter is 10 to the minus 3 liters, or 0.001 liters. I'll talk about this other side note in just a second. Micro is 10 to the negative 6. Now this one's a little bit strange in its the way that it has this little like U. It's not actually a U, but it looks like one. And that actually means micro. So be aware of that. That is 10 to the minus 6 liters, or you can have a whole bunch of zeros. Nano is 10 to the negative 9. Nano just sounds like 9 to me. So 1 nanosecond would be 10 to the negative 9 seconds. That is super fast. And there's a whole bunch of zeros in converting that. There are also two more. One is pico, 10 to the minus 12th, and femto, 10 to the minus 15th. Lasers that can go super duper fast, or femtoseconds. So those are very, very, very fast pulsing lasers. So we can also talk about this as far as like 1 milliliter in SI units. Remember we said that that would be the same thing, or 1 liter is a 1 meter cubed. Well, in allied health, you have to be aware that 1 milliliter is the same thing as 1 centimeter cubed, or as you may have heard when measuring things out in a syringe, that is 1 cc. You've heard of like cc's in a syringe maybe. And cc means cubic centimeters. Another way to look at this, as we talked about the other day, is that 1 meter cubed is 1 liter. And so that's the same thing as saying length times width times volume. Or sorry, length times width times height is equal to that volume. Okay, cool. So we can use conversions of these units. And we consider them to be exact numbers. So whatever this 10 to the x is, it should not be determined, or sorry, it should not be used to determine significant figures. So we get the significant figures from this, just like we would in scientific notation, not from this guy, or any type of conversion that we use in math, which let's talk about what that means. So when we use prefixes, and when we look at dimensional analysis problems, so this is kind of like a precursor for dimensional analysis, here's how I like to look at it. Let's say that we start with the basics, that 1 meter is 100 centimeters. Those two things are equal, right? So if they're equal, I can do one of two things to them. I'm going to start here on the left. Okay, so here's my thing that is equal. I can divide each side by, let's say, 1 meter. If we do that, what ends up happening is 1 meter cancels out with 1 meter, and that is equal to just the 1 that you see down below, right? So that means that when I multiply anything by this, I'm just multiplying it by 1. You can multiply anything by 1, and it doesn't change the value of what that one thing is. So we can use this to convert from one unit to the next. Kind of cool. Okay, Now let's go with the other side. We start with the same things that are equal. 100 centimeters is equal to 1 meter. So if I've got this over here, and this time I divide by 100 centimeters, we can do that, then in this case, my 100 centimeters are going to cancel out, and that's going to equal 1, which means that this is also a thing you can multiply by in order to change your units. So you might say something like, well, how do I know which one to use? Well, let's talk about that. Also, as a side note, the 100 centimeters is equal to 1. I didn't really talk about in the previous page that those two things could be equal to. Just be careful, because you could say 10 to the minus 2 meters is equal to 1 centimeter, or you could say 1 or 10 to the second centimeters is equal to a meter. There are different charts that you can find all around that could show you both. Just make sure you're consistent and think about this a little bit. Should there be a lot more centimeters than there are meters? Yep. Should there be a small number of meters than there are centimeters? Yep. And if that's not the case, you probably have something backwards there, okay? Okay. So since either of those are 1, we can multiply that by anything we want. Let's try this and try using these terms in conversions. So I'm going to start with the first problem. What is the value of 0.250 meters in centimeters? Okay, I need to convert this from meters to centimeters. What that tells me is that this is my entire first unit, right? So I start with what I have. What we can then do is choose one of these inequalities to get us out of meters and into centimeters. You all realize that if we multiply this with meters on the bottom, then that will cancel out with the meters that's right here. So those two values cancel, and we end up with the unit of centimeters. Now, I like to say that when it comes to chemistry, you get to cheat with math, but only if you're smart enough to do it. And what I mean by that is if you use your units, they will tell you what to do. So use them. So in this case, what I do to solve the math part of it, I just multiply 0.250 times 100 centimeters. I get my value as 250 centimeters. Now, we do also need to keep in check our significant figures. There are 3 over here. So notice that I have put a decimal point here to declare that that last 0 means something. It's a place, it actually is a significant figure. Okay. So what if instead we start with a question that says, how many meters are in 3,500 centimeters? Well, in this case, we're given centimeters. We need to get into meters. So we do that by saying, okay, we're starting with the unit that we know. And instead, we're going to use the conversion factor that has centimeters on the bottom, because that allows our units to cancel out. So whatever this is, that gets canceled. And when we put this into our calculator, we multiply everything that's on top and divide by everything that's on bottom. So it's 3,500 times 1, which is the same thing as 3,500, divided by 100. So that should give you 3.5, and our unit now is meters. Okay. Now, go back and check sig figs. Here we have 2 sig figs, because the last 2 zeros are not significant, and that's how we've represented our answer as well. So we're good to go. Good job. Practice these. Thanks.